Before we dive into this incredible story, if you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss these powerful biblical narratives. Your support means everything to this channel. Now, let's begin. Long before Joseph became the ruler of Egypt, before his name echoed through palaces and his wisdom saved nations from starvation, he was simply a boy living in the tents of his father Jacob. He was the 11th son born into a household already fractured by jealousy, favoritism, and tension that simmered like a pot about to boil over. Jacob had 12 sons from 4 different women, Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah, and the dynamics of that family were anything but simple. But among all his children, Jacob loved Joseph more than any other, and he made no effort to hide it. Joseph was the first son of Rachel, the woman Jacob had truly loved. Jacob had worked 14 years to marry her, enduring deception and hardship, and when she finally bore him a son, that child became the living embodiment of everything Jacob had suffered for. Rachel was beautiful, beloved, and deeply cherished, and Joseph carried her memory in his very existence. Every time Jacob looked at Joseph, he saw Rachel's eyes, her spirit, her grace. And so Jacob poured his affection onto Joseph in ways that made his brothers burn with resentment. Jacob made Joseph a coat, a richly ornamented robe of many colors. It was not just clothing, it was a statement. It declared Joseph's favored status to everyone who saw it. In that culture, such a garment signified rank, honor, and authority. It meant Joseph was being set apart, elevated above his brothers who labored in the fields while Joseph seemed to walk in privilege. The coat was beautiful, vibrant, unmistakable, and it became the symbol of everything his brothers hated about him. Joseph's brothers were older, rougher, hardened by years of working with flocks and fighting off predators. They had grown up watching their father's unequal love play out in painful ways. Leah's sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, had watched their mother weep over Jacob's coldness toward her. The sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, knew what it felt like to be born from desperation rather than love. And then there was Joseph, 17 years old, wearing that coat, walking among them like a prince among servants. But Joseph was young. He didn't yet understand the weight of jealousy or the danger of pride. He was naive in the way that favored children often are, unaware of how his words landed, unaware of the bitterness growing in the hearts of those around him. And so when he began having dreams, vivid, prophetic dreams, he made a choice that would alter the course of his entire life. He told his brothers about them. The first dream came to him one night as he slept beneath the stars. In the dream, he and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in the field. Suddenly, Joseph's sheaf stood upright, and the sheaves of his brothers gathered around it and bowed down to it. When Joseph woke, he was filled with wonder. He didn't think twice before sharing it with his brothers. Their reaction was immediate and cold. "Do you intend to reign over us?" they asked bitterly. "Will you actually rule us?" The dream didn't inspire awe in them, it ignited fury. To them, Joseph was already insufferable, and now he was claiming that one day they would bow before him. It was too much. Joseph wasn't finished. Another dream came, even more grandiose than the first. This time the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to him. Joseph shared this one too, and even Jacob rebuked him. "What is this dream you had?" his father asked. "Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" Even Jacob, who loved Joseph deeply, found the dream troubling. Yet despite his rebuke, Jacob kept the matter in mind, wondering what it could mean. Joseph's brothers, however, kept more than the matter in mind. They kept hatred in their hearts. Every time they saw Joseph, they saw arrogance. Every time he spoke, they heard superiority. The coat, the dreams, the favoritism, it all festered into something dark and dangerous. They couldn't speak a kind word to him. They watched him from a distance, and in their silence, something sinister began to grow. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers, who were grazing the flocks near Shechem. Joseph put on his colorful coat and set out, walking through the hills with the innocence of someone who didn't realize he was walking into a trap. When his brothers saw him coming from a distance, that unmistakable coat catching the light, they began to plot. "Here comes that dreamer," they said to one another with venom in their voices. "Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams." Murder, that's how far jealousy had taken them. Years of bitterness, years of watching their father's unequal love, years of feeling invisible, it had all culminated in a plan to end Joseph's life. But Reuben, the oldest, heard their plan and tried to intervene. He didn't want blood on their hands, and he secretly hoped to rescue Joseph and return him to their father. "Let's not take his life," Reuben urged. "Don't shed any blood. Throw him into this cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him." The brothers agreed, perhaps because Reuben's authority as the firstborn still carried some weight. So when Joseph arrived, cheerful and unsuspecting, they seized him. They stripped him of that hated coat, the coat that had symbolized everything they despised, and they threw him into an empty cistern. The pit was dry, dark, and deep. Joseph's cries echoed off the stone walls as he realized what was happening. He pleaded with them, begged them to pull him out, but they sat down to eat their meal, ignoring his desperate voice rising from the pit. While they ate, a caravan of Ishmaelite traders appeared on the horizon, their camels loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, heading toward Egypt. Judah looked at the caravan and then at his brothers. "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood?" he said. "Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." The brothers agreed. They pulled Joseph out of the cistern, and for 20 shekels of silver, the price of a slave, they sold their own brother to strangers. Joseph's pleas turned to screams as he was bound and dragged away. He looked back at his brothers, disbelief and terror flooding his face. How could they do this? They were his family. They were supposed to protect him, but their faces were hard, unmoved. They watched as the caravan disappeared into the distance, taking Joseph farther and farther from everything he had ever known. Reuben had been away when the sale happened. When he returned to the cistern and found it empty, he tore his clothes in anguish. "The boy isn't there," he cried. "Where can I turn now?" But the deed was done. There was no undoing it. The brothers took Joseph's coat, the beautiful, multicolored coat, and tore it. They slaughtered a goat and dipped the coat in its blood, staining it until it looked like evidence of a tragedy. Then they brought it to their father. "We found this," they said, their voices carefully neutral. "Examine it to see whether it is your son's robe." Jacob recognized it immediately. His face went pale, his hands trembled, and a sound of anguish tore from his throat. "It is my son's robe," he cried. "Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces." Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son with a grief so deep it seemed it would swallow him whole. His other sons and daughters tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "No," he said, "I will continue to mourn until I join my son in the grave." Jacob believed Joseph was dead, but Joseph was very much alive, though perhaps wishing he wasn't. He was bound, terrified, and being carried toward a future he couldn't begin to imagine. Everything he had known, his father's love, his home, his identity, had been ripped away in a single day. The boy who once wore a coat of many colors now wore chains. The boy who had dreamed of his brothers bowing to him was now at the mercy of strangers who saw him as nothing more than property. The journey to Egypt was long, hot, and brutal. Joseph's wrists were raw from the ropes, his throat dry from thirst, his heart shattered by betrayal. He replayed the moment over and over in his mind, his brothers' cold faces, their willingness to sell him, their indifference to his suffering. He thought of his father who must be devastated. He thought of Benjamin, his younger brother, who would grow up without him. And he thought of the dreams that had started all of this. Had they been real, or had they been nothing more than the foolish imaginings of a naive boy? When the caravan finally reached Egypt, Joseph was sold again. This time he was purchased by a man named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Potiphar was wealthy, powerful, and influential. His household was vast, filled with servants, officials, and endless responsibilities. Joseph was thrown into this world as a slave, no longer a son, no longer free, no longer anything but property. But something remarkable happened. Even in slavery, even in a foreign land where he didn't speak the language or understand the customs, Joseph did not break. He didn't collapse into bitterness or despair. Instead, he worked. He worked with diligence, integrity, and excellence. He didn't work as a slave who resented his position. He worked as a man who still believed deep down that his life had purpose. 2 more years passed. 2 long, silent years in which Joseph continued to manage the prison, continued to serve faithfully, continued to wait. The cupbearers promised to remember him had dissolved into nothing. Joseph had experienced betrayal from his brothers, false accusation from Potiphar's wife, and now abandonment from someone he had helped. The pattern of injustice seemed unending. Yet still, Joseph did not lose his integrity. He did not become the kind of man his circumstances tried to make him. Something deep within him, perhaps the memory of his father's faith, perhaps the dreams God had given him as a boy, perhaps simply the character that suffering had refined rather than destroyed, kept him anchored. But God's timing is rarely what we expect, and his plans unfold in ways that shock even those who believe in him. While Joseph languished in prison, forgotten by men but not by God, something was happening in Pharaoh's palace that would change everything. One night Pharaoh had 2 dreams. They were not ordinary dreams, they were vivid, disturbing, and heavy with meaning. In the first dream, Pharaoh stood by the Nile River and saw 7 cows come up out of the water. They were sleek, fat, and healthy, and they grazed among the reeds. Then 7 other cows came up after them, ugly, gaunt, and sickly. The thin cows stood beside the fat cows on the riverbank, and then something grotesque happened. The ugly, gaunt cows ate up the 7 sleek, fat cows. But even after devouring them, the thin cows looked just as ugly and gaunt as before. Then Pharaoh woke up, troubled and shaken. He fell back asleep, and another dream came. This time he saw 7 heads of grain growing on a single stalk, healthy, full, and golden. Then 7 other heads of grain sprouted after them, thin, scorched by the east wind, and withered. The thin heads of grain swallowed up the 7 healthy, full heads. Pharaoh woke again, and this time his mind would not rest. Something about these dreams felt significant, ominous, unavoidable. In the morning, Pharaoh was deeply troubled. He summoned all the magicians and wise men of Egypt and told them his dreams, but none of them could interpret them. These were men trained in the mysteries of their gods, skilled in divination and the reading of omens, yet they stood before Pharaoh speechless. The dreams defied their understanding. Pharaoh's frustration grew. He was the most powerful man in the known world, yet he could not find peace because of 2 dreams no one could explain. Then finally, the cupbearer remembered. Standing in Pharaoh's court, watching the magicians fail one after another, something stirred in his memory. A Hebrew slave in prison, a man who had interpreted his dream with perfect accuracy 2 years earlier. Guilt washed over him. He stepped forward and said, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings. Pharaoh was once angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. Each of us had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. Now a young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man the interpretation of his dream, and things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us." Pharaoh's eyes sharpened with interest. "Send for him," he commanded. "Bring this Hebrew to me immediately." Messengers rushed to the prison. Joseph was pulled from his cell, and for the first time in over a decade, he was treated not as a criminal but as someone whose presence was urgently needed. They shaved him, gave him clean clothes to replace his prison garments, and brought him before Pharaoh. Joseph stood in the grand throne room, surrounded by columns, gold, and the symbols of Egyptian power. It was a world so far removed from the dusty shepherding life of his youth that it felt like another universe entirely. Pharaoh looked at him and said, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph's response revealed everything about the man he had become. He could have seized the moment, taken credit, positioned himself as someone with extraordinary powers. Instead, he said simply, I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. Even in this moment, his first real chance at freedom, his first encounter with power after years of suffering, Joseph deflected glory away from himself and pointed it toward God. He had not lost his humility. He had not let bitterness make him self-serving. He remained a man who knew where true wisdom came from. Pharaoh recounted both dreams in detail: the cows, the grain, the consuming of the healthy by the sickly. Joseph listened carefully, and as Pharaoh spoke, understanding flooded Joseph's mind. It was the same gift he had experienced in prison, but now magnified, clarified, urgent. When Pharaoh finished, Joseph spoke with a confidence that came not from arrogance but from certainty. The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same, Joseph said. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is one dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and so are the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. They are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered, because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. The court fell silent. Every eye was on Joseph. Pharaoh leaned forward, his expression intense. This interpretation resonated in a way none of the magician's guesses had. It felt true. It felt inevitable. But Joseph didn't stop there. He could have simply interpreted the dreams and stepped back, leaving Pharaoh to figure out what to do. Instead, wisdom rose in him, practical, strategic wisdom born from years of managing households, overseeing prisons, and navigating impossible situations. Joseph continued, and now let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take 1/5 of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of these good years that are coming and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh, to be kept in the cities for food. This food should be held in reserve for the country, to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine. It was a complete plan, not just a warning but a solution. Joseph laid out exactly what needed to be done, how to prepare, how to survive. And Pharaoh, along with all his officials, recognized something profound. This man was not speaking from human cleverness alone. There was a divine wisdom operating through him. Pharaoh turned to his officials and asked, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then he turned back to Joseph and said, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." In a single moment, Joseph's entire life pivoted. Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and placed it on Joseph's finger, a symbol of absolute authority. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted before him, "Make way!" Pharaoh gave Joseph the Egyptian name Zaphenath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, the daughter of a priest, as his wife. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. 13 years had passed since his brothers had sold him into slavery. 13 years of suffering, injustice, waiting, and faithfulness. And now, in the span of a single day, he went from forgotten prisoner to the second most powerful man in Egypt. Only Pharaoh himself held more authority. Joseph had gone from slave to ruler, from pit to palace, from despair to destiny. But this was not a fairy tale ending. This was the beginning of the fulfillment of the dreams God had given Joseph as a boy, the dreams his brothers had mocked, the dreams that had seemed absurd. Joseph now stood at the center of a plan far larger than his personal vindication. God had not rescued him just for his own sake. God had positioned him to save nations, including, eventually, the very brothers who had betrayed him. Joseph traveled throughout Egypt, assessing the land, organizing the collection system, and preparing for what was coming. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected enormous quantities of grain, storing it in the cities, with the grain from the surrounding fields placed in each city. He stored up huge quantities, so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure, like the sand of the sea. During those years of plenty, Joseph's life took on a fullness he had never known. Asenath bore him 2 sons, and Joseph gave them names that told the story of his journey. The first he named Manasseh, saying, "God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." The second he named Ephraim, saying, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." The names were both a closure and an opening. Joseph acknowledged his past pain, but he also celebrated God's redemption of it. Then the 7 years of abundance came to an end, and the famine began, exactly as Joseph had predicted. It swept across Egypt and the surrounding regions with devastating force. Crops failed, wells dried up, livestock died, people grew desperate, but Egypt, because of Joseph's preparations, had food. The storehouses were full, organized, ready. When the Egyptians cried out to Pharaoh for food, he told them, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." Joseph opened the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe throughout Egypt. And people from all over the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere. Egypt became the lifeline for surrounding nations, and Joseph, once a slave, once a prisoner, was now the man everyone depended on for survival. The famine reached into Canaan, into the land where Joseph's family still lived. Jacob and his sons watched as their grain supplies dwindled, as the fields yielded nothing, as hunger began to press against their household. Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, and he turned to his sons with urgency. "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" he said. "I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." 10 of Joseph's brothers set out for Egypt, but Jacob refused to send Benjamin, Joseph's younger brother, the only other son of Rachel, the only one Jacob had left from the woman he truly loved. Jacob feared that harm might come to Benjamin, just as he believed harm had come to Joseph all those years ago. The old man's heart could not bear the thought of losing another son. The brothers traveled to Egypt and eventually made their way to the place where grain was being distributed. They stood in line with countless others, Canaanites, Hittites, people from nations near and far, all desperate for food. And when their turn came, they were brought before the governor of Egypt himself, the man who controlled all the grain, the man who held the power of life and death over entire populations. They didn't recognize him. Joseph was dressed in Egyptian robes, wearing the gold chain of authority, his head shaved in the Egyptian manner, speaking through an interpreter. More than 20 years had passed since they had sold him. He had been a 17-year-old boy then. Now he was a man in his late 30s, weathered by suffering and refined by power. But Joseph recognized them instantly. The moment he saw their faces, older, worn, but unmistakably his brothers, his heart seized. Memories flooded back. The pit, the pleading, the sound of their voices as they sold him, the last sight of them growing smaller as the caravan carried him away. But Joseph did not reveal himself. Instead, he spoke to them harshly, pretending to be a stranger. "Where do you come from?" he demanded through the interpreter. "From the land of Canaan," they replied, bowing low before him, "to buy food." Joseph's breath caught. They were bowing before him, just as the dream had foretold all those years ago, the sheaves bowing down, the stars bowing down. Here it was, unfolding in real time. But the fulfillment brought no satisfaction, only a complex tangle of emotions Joseph could barely contain. He accused them of being spies. "You have come to see where our land is unprotected," he said. "No, my lord," they protested, bowing again. "Your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies." Joseph pressed them. "No, you have come to see where our land is unprotected." They explained further, desperate to convince him. "Your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more." One is no more. The words cut through Joseph like a blade. That's what they had told their father. That's what they believed or claimed to believe. Joseph had been erased, reduced to a memory, a ghost, a brother who was no more. Joseph decided to test them. He wanted to see if they had changed, if the men who had sold him were still capable of such cruelty, or if time and suffering had transformed them. "This is how you will be tested," he said. "As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother. The rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. If you are not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies." He put them all in custody for 3 days. In those 3 days, Joseph wrestled with his emotions privately. He watched them through the walls of the prison, heard their voices, saw their fear. Part of him wanted justice, wanted them to feel a fraction of what he had felt. But another part of him, the part shaped by God's faithfulness through every trial, knew that revenge was not the path forward. On the 3rd day, Joseph had them brought before him again. "Do this and you will live, for I fear God," he said. "If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison, while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving households. But you must bring your youngest brother to me, so that your words may be verified and that you may not die." They agreed, but as they spoke among themselves in Hebrew, not knowing Joseph could understand them, their conversation revealed everything. "Surely we are being punished because of our brother," they said to one another. "We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come on us." Reuben, who had tried to save Joseph all those years ago, spoke up. "Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood." Joseph turned away from them and wept. The sound of their guilt, the acknowledgement of what they had done, broke something open inside him. They remembered, they carried it. They had not forgotten him as easily as he had feared. But he composed himself, turned back, and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Then he gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to return each man's silver to his sack, and to give them provisions for their journey. The brothers loaded their grain and left, but when they stopped for the night and one of them opened his sack to feed his donkey, he found his silver. "My silver has been returned," he said to his brothers. "Here it is in my sack." Their hearts sank and they turned to each other trembling. "What is this that God has done to us?" they asked. They felt the weight of something larger than human politics or coincidence. They felt the hand of divine justice closing in. When they returned to Jacob in Canaan, they told him everything. The harsh Egyptian governor, the accusation of spying Simeon held as a hostage, and the demand that Benjamin be brought back. Then, as they emptied their sacks, each man found his silver returned. Fear gripped them all. Jacob was devastated. "You have deprived me of my children," he cried. "Joseph is no more and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." Reuben tried to persuade him. "You may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care, and I will bring him back." But Jacob refused. "My son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm comes to him on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow." But the famine persisted, and eventually their grain ran out again. Jacob told his sons to go back to Egypt and buy more food, but Judah reminded him firmly, The man warned us solemnly, "You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother along with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you will not send him, we will not go down, because the man said to us, 'You will not see my face again unless your brother is with you.'" Jacob, worn down by hunger and desperation, finally relented, but his words revealed the depth of his grief and fear. "If it must be, then do this. Take some of the best products of the land in your bags and take them down to the man as a gift. Take your brother also and go back to the man at once. And may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you. As for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved." The brothers returned to Egypt, this time with Benjamin. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, his only full brother, the one who had been just a child when Joseph was taken, his emotions nearly overwhelmed him. He gave orders to his steward, "Take these men to my house, slaughter an animal and prepare a meal. They are to eat with me at noon." The brothers were terrified when they were taken to Joseph's house. They thought they were being trapped because of the silver that had been returned in their sacks. They approached Joseph's steward and explained about the silver, insisting they had brought it back along with additional silver to buy more food. The steward, who knew Joseph's plan, reassured them, "It's all right, don't be afraid. Your God, the God of your father, has given you treasure in your sacks. I received your silver." Then he brought Simeon out to them. When Joseph came home, the brothers presented him with the gifts they had brought, bowing down before him to the ground. Again the dream echoed. Joseph asked them how they were and then said, "How is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living?" "Your servant our father is still alive and well," they replied, bowing low to pay him honor. Joseph looked around and saw Benjamin. "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" he asked. Then, before they could answer, his voice softened. "God be gracious to you, my son." Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room and wept there. After washing his face, he came back out and, controlling himself, he said, "Serve the food." They ate together, but Joseph ate separately, as did the Egyptians, because Egyptians could not eat with Hebrews. The brothers were seated before Joseph in order of their ages, from the firstborn to the youngest, and they looked at each other in astonishment. Joseph had food brought to them from his table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as anyone else's. They feasted and drank freely with him, unaware they were dining with the brother they had betrayed. But Joseph was not finished testing them. He commanded his steward to fill the men's sacks with as much food as they could carry and to put each man's silver back in his sack. Then he gave a specific instruction: "Put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain." Early the next morning the brothers were sent on their way. They had not gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, "Go after those men at once, and when you catch up with them, say to them, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this the cup my master drinks from and uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you have done.'" When the steward overtook them and accused them, they were indignant. "Why does my lord say such things?" they protested. "Far be it from your servants to do anything like that. We even brought back to you from the land of Canaan the silver we found inside the mouths of our sacks. So why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If any of your servants is found to have it, he will die, and the rest of us will become my lord's slaves." The steward searched, beginning with the oldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. The brothers tore their clothes in anguish, loaded their donkeys, and returned to the city. This was Joseph's true test. Would they abandon Benjamin as they had abandoned him? Would they let the youngest suffer to save themselves, or had they changed? When Judah and his brothers came back to Joseph's house, Joseph was still there. They threw themselves to the ground before him, and Joseph said to them, "What is this you have done? Don't you know that a man like me can find things out by divination?" Judah's response was broken, defeated. "What can we say to my lord?" he replied. "What can we say? How can we prove our innocence? God has uncovered your servant's guilt. We are now my Lord's slaves, we ourselves, and the one who was found to have the cup." But Joseph shook his head. "Far be it from me to do such a thing. Only the man who was found to have the cup will become my slave. The rest of you, go back to your father in peace." This was the moment. This was the test. They could leave. They could return home, tell Jacob that Benjamin had been caught stealing, and save themselves. It was exactly the kind of situation they had faced before. One brother in trouble, the opportunity to walk away, the chance to prioritize their own survival. But something had changed in them. The years had done their work. Suffering had refined them. Guilt had transformed them. They were not the same men who had sold Joseph. Judah stepped forward. The man who had once suggested selling Joseph now became the one who would offer everything to save Benjamin. He approached Joseph and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak a word to my lord. Do not be angry with your servant, though you are equal to Pharaoh himself." Then Judah began to speak, and what poured out was one of the most moving speeches in all of Scripture. He recounted everything: how Joseph had asked about their father and their brother, how they had explained that their father loved the youngest deeply because he was the child of his old age and his brother was dead, how Jacob had been afraid to let Benjamin go, how they had promised to bring him back safely. Judah's voice grew thick with emotion as he continued, "Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. How can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? No, do not let me see the misery that would come on my father." It was an offer of complete substitution. Judah was willing to give up his freedom, his future, his life, for Benjamin. The man who had once profited from selling a brother into slavery was now volunteering to become a slave to save a brother. The transformation was complete. Joseph could no longer control himself. His emotions, held back for so long through test after test, finally broke through. He cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Through his tears, Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were terrified and could not answer him. They stood frozen, speechless, unable to process what they were hearing. The powerful Egyptian governor who held their lives in his hands was Joseph, the brother they had betrayed, the brother they had sold, the brother they thought was dead or lost forever. Joseph saw their terror and said gently, "Come close to me." When they had come near, he said again, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt." Joseph's words revealed something extraordinary about the man he had become. He could have condemned them. He could have punished them. He had every right to seek revenge for the years of suffering they had caused him. But instead, he offered them grace. More than that, he reframed their sin within the context of God's sovereignty. He didn't excuse what they had done. It was still wrong, still cruel, still painful. But he recognized that God had taken their evil intentions and woven them into a plan of redemption that would save thousands of lives. This is one of the most profound theological moments in all of Scripture. Joseph's statement, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives," became a foundation for understanding how God works through human choices, even sinful ones, to accomplish his purposes. Joseph had not simply survived his suffering. He had been transformed by it, shaped by it, used through it. Joseph continued urgently, "Now hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds and all you have. I will provide for you there because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute." Then Joseph threw his arms around his brother Benjamin and wept, and Benjamin embraced him, weeping. And Joseph kissed all his brothers and wept over them. Only then, after that outpouring of emotion and forgiveness, were his brothers able to talk with him. The barrier of fear and guilt began to dissolve in the face of Joseph's overwhelming grace. News of this reached Pharaoh's palace. "Joseph's brothers have come." Pharaoh and all his officials were pleased. Pharaoh himself told Joseph, "Tell your brothers, do this. Load your animals and return to the land of Canaan and bring your father and your families back to me. I will give you the best of the land of Egypt and you can enjoy the fat of the land." You are also directed to tell them, "Take some carts from Egypt for your children and your wives, and get your father and come. Never mind about your belongings, because the best of all Egypt will be yours." The brothers left Egypt transformed. They had come as broken men carrying guilt and fear. They returned as forgiven men carrying hope and provision. They had wagons loaded with gifts from Joseph, new clothes for each of them, and for Benjamin, 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. For their father, Joseph sent 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions. As they left, Joseph said to them, "Don't quarrel on the way." Even in that moment, he knew them well enough to know that guilt and stress might cause them to turn on each other, to blame one another for the past. But Joseph wanted them to move forward in peace. When they reached Canaan and came to their father Jacob, they told him, "Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt." Jacob's heart nearly stopped. He was stunned. He did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. "I'm convinced," he said. "My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." The journey to Egypt was both a physical trip and an emotional pilgrimage. Jacob, now called Israel, set out with all that belonged to him. When he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in a vision at night and said, "Jacob, Jacob." "Here I am," he replied. "I am God, the God of your father," God said. "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again, and Joseph's own hand will close your eyes." It was a promise and a comfort. Jacob's deepest fear, dying without seeing Joseph again, would not come to pass. So Jacob continued his journey, and all his descendants went with him, his sons and grandsons, his daughters and granddaughters. 70 people in all went down to Egypt. Jacob sent Judah ahead to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. When they arrived in the region, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, Israel threw his arms around his son and wept for a long time. The embrace held decades of grief, loss, longing, and now overwhelming joy. Jacob said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." But Joseph had plans for his family's future. He told his brothers, "I will go up and speak to Pharaoh and will say to him, 'My brothers and my father's household who were living in the land of Canaan have come to me. The men are shepherds, they tend livestock, and they have brought along their flocks and herds and everything they own.' When Pharaoh calls you in and asks, 'What is your occupation?' you should answer, 'Your servants have tended livestock from our boyhood on, just as our fathers did.' Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen, for all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians." Joseph's strategy was brilliant. By emphasizing that his family were shepherds, an occupation Egyptians looked down upon, he ensured they would be given land in Goshen, away from the main Egyptian population. This would allow them to maintain their identity, their customs, their worship of God, without being absorbed into Egyptian culture. It was protection disguised as separation. Joseph brought 5 of his brothers before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh asked them, "What is your occupation?" "Your servants are shepherds," they replied, "just as our fathers were." They added, "We have come to live here for a while because the famine is severe in Canaan and your servants' flocks have no pasture. So now, please let your servants settle in Goshen." Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Your father and your brothers have come to you, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen. And if you know of any among them with special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock." Then Joseph brought his father Jacob in and presented him to Pharaoh. Jacob blessed Pharaoh, and Pharaoh asked him, "How old are you?" Jacob replied, "The years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers." He blessed Pharaoh again and went out from his presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramesses, as Pharaoh directed. Joseph also provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food, according to the number of their children. The family that had been fractured by jealousy, broken by betrayal, and scattered by tragedy was now reunited and provided for. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years, and the years of his life were 147. As his time to die approached, he called for Joseph and made him swear to bury him not in Egypt, but in the land God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.